The mysterious and dramatic dismemberment has made Elizabeth Short a murder victim with celebrity status. Novels and Hollywood films have been inspired by this unsolved case. Legions of fans have grown obsessed with the gruesome details of her murder and who could be the killer. Who would be compelled to tear this woman apart? In the 1940s, it seemed like everyone in Hollywood was a suspect. The finger has been pointed to everyone from famous gangster Bugsy Siegel to legendary director Orson Welles. But the LAPD could never solve the crime. The murder becomes forever known as the Black Dahlia. Steve Hodel was only a boy living in Hollywood when Elizabeth Short's severed corpse was found. By the time Steve joined the LAPD in 1963, the Black Dahlia was already the most notorious unsolved murder in Los Angeles history. Now, 50 years later, the nature of Elizabeth Short's murder reveals much to the retired detective about the kind of person capable of such a killing.
Clearly, this is somebody that suffered extensive torture, maybe 2 or 3 hours. We noticed that this was a perfect bisection. There's only one way you can divide a body without going through the bone, and that's going through the second and third lumbar vertebrae. This was not a butcher or a meat cutter. This had to have been somebody highly skilled in medicine.
With over 40 years of investigating experience, Detective Steve Hodel has never faced a more daunting case. But he could never imagine the personal connection he would make to the Black Dahlia murder, one that involves his own bloodline. Following the death of his father in 1991, Steve stumbles across a mysterious black and white photo of a nude woman. It is a picture that his father took.
I looked at the photograph and I said, why does this face seem familiar to me? To this day, I don't know why, but the Black Dahlia comes to mind.
Steve believes the photo is of a nude Elizabeth Short. But why would Steve's father, Dr. George Hodel, have this intimate photograph of the Black Dahlia?
I started researching the investigation and looking into it because I really knew nothing, even though I'd been with LAPD and this was their most famous unsolved case. And I discovered that somebody with surgical skill had committed the crime. And I thought, interesting, Dad had surgical skill, but it still never occurred to me that he might be the suspect.
But as Steve's investigation continues, details of the crime all point him to only one man who could be the killer.
My God, this can't be. There is the possibility.
Steve's own father, Dr. George Hodel. Steve's conviction runs so deep, he takes it upon himself to reopen the case of the Black Dahlia. As Steve's investigation develops, he realizes that there are striking circumstances that connect his father to this murder. Steve calls these thought prints.
On a fingerprint, you have whorls, arches, ridges. Think of thoughts as sort of the mental ridges, arches, whorls of the mind. And I've put together a bunch of points that link George Hodel to the crime in different ways.
George Hodel is a gifted young man full of promise and privilege. By the age of 9, he is a piano prodigy. George is recognized as a genius, scoring an IQ 1 point higher than Albert Einstein. But high genius comes with a price. Early acceptance to college at the age of 14 keeps George socially awkward and isolated. George retreats into himself to escape. He begins experimenting with drugs. He becomes engrossed with art, sex, and violence. George thinks of himself as a writer and photographer, but is never recognized for his talent. He becomes consumed with the darker, more dangerous sides of Los Angeles. And he is driven. Lying about his age, 19-year-old George becomes a newspaper crime reporter, writing gruesome accounts of murder scenes along the back streets of Los Angeles. The violence inspires him.
Oftentimes, genius comes with emotional instability. That, paired with George's precocious obsession with violence, can be a dangerous combination.
As a child, Steve was not close to his father, but remembers him as larger than life.
He was strict, he was formal, he wasn't very emotional, but his charisma and his charm, it was more of the awe that we worshipped him. He was almost godlike to us.
George Hodel becomes a doctor. By day, he runs a VD clinic that holds the secrets of Hollywood studio moguls and celebrities alike.
Dad was very charismatic. He'd walk into a room and you felt you were like in the presence of a king or a pope. He had that kind of power.
By night, he throws decadent parties where the Hollywood elite indulge in drugs and beautiful women.
All of these amazing people coming and partying and drinking and having a wonderful time. Henry Miller, Man Ray, John Huston. You were literally in the middle of Hollywood, yet you were totally secluded once you entered this concrete fortress.
It is here that George meets Elizabeth Short. Steve believes that his father and Elizabeth Short maintained a love affair. A love affair that may have ended on a vacant lot with Elizabeth Short's corpse, perfectly bisected at the waist. The gruesome unsolved murder of Elizabeth Short has even inspired Hollywood films and pulp novels. Veteran LAPD detective Steve Hodel is convinced that he has found the man responsible for the Black Dahlia murder. His own father, Dr. George Hodel. Steve sees his father's connections to her murder everywhere. In 1947, Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, is found naked with her mouth gashed ear to ear. Her corpse is posed 6 inches from the sidewalk on a vicious display, and her body is perfectly cut in half at the waist. Shockingly, none of her internal organs were damaged in the dismemberment.
The key is that a hemicorpectomy was performed on Elizabeth Short. It's only by going through the second and third lumbar vertebrae can you perform this operation.
Steve reviews his father's records from medical school and discovers George had performed over 700 hours of surgery.
So clearly he was highly skilled in surgery and had the ability to bisect a body.
Steve sees his father's touch on the anonymous postcards that taunted Los Angeles newspapers.
What do we have here? We have headlines. He's sending in headlines. This is not some thug off the street. This is somebody trained in journalism.
George's experience as a young newspaper crime reporter provides a distinct connection for Steve.
It was a journalist. It was a journalist killer.
But it is George's infatuation with surrealist art that has Steve convinced that his father is the killer.
The key to understanding the Black Dahlia murder is surrealism. He always saw himself as a surrealist. He believed that there was no difference between the dream and the waking state. Where others intellectually believed this, surrealists, he actually truly believed it in his heart of hearts. If you go there, that's a very dangerous position to be in because it basically opens you up to just about anything. There are no rules. There is no morality. There is no God.
The surrealist artist Man Ray and George become friends, sharing a love for deviant sex and the violent domination of women. Man Ray is an enormous influence on George as an artist, acting as a surrealist mentor. Ultimately, it is this relationship that leads Steve to consider Elizabeth Short's posed corpse.
I reviewed the crime scene photos initially, and they bothered me. The deliberate posing. What was I seeing here? What was the killer trying to say? I started reviewing Man Ray's photographs. A lot of them depicted decapitations, segmented bodies, and one of his most famous photographs was called the Minotaur. And this is a woman's body bisected at the waist, and the hands are posed in this position to represent the horns. This is a bull. The Minotaur, of course, was the half-man, half-bull of Crete, who devoured young maidens and was kept alive in the labyrinth.
Did the surrealist work of Man Ray influence George Hodel in his crime? Elizabeth Short's perfectly bisected body, the deliberate posing of the figure, the grotesque gash carved across her mouth. Is the Black Dahlia George Hodel's work of art?
He actually completed a masterpiece of surrealism. Elizabeth Short's body was his canvas. His scalpel was his paintbrush. He created something that he knew would live forever.
After a 7-year investigation, Steve presents his evidence against his own father to the authorities.
I go in secret and I take all of my evidence to an active head deputy district attorney, Stephen Kay. He says, based on what you've brought to me and based on the photographs and based on the evidence, and were your father still alive, I would seek the death penalty.
But mysteries surrounding the Black Dahlia case will keep the murder of Elizabeth Short unsolved.
All of these reports have been sanitized from the LAPD, and they've all disappeared. Not only have all of the transcripts and all of the information on George Hodel disappeared, but so has all of the physical evidence. Potential linkage to DNA has all vanished. LAPD has no explanation for it. All they say is, well, sometimes stuff happens.
Steve believes that evidence in the Black Dahlia file was destroyed to protect his father. Dr. George Hodel's VD clinic may have held sexual secrets of the Hollywood elite.